my god, this is crazy.
We have to run. What just happened?
This moment right here is crazy. There's so many different things happening here that are absolutely monumental for us to be able to understand what's really going on in Fromland, that it's absolutely insane. Because there are so many different signs in this episode that everything from the very beginning that we have been told has been a lie. Like, first of all, we now know that these giant dolls have always been hostile to the people living in Fromville, and that there was never a time when these dolls have ever been working with or friendly to the people of the town. And we also know that these giant dolls can seemingly only come out of the lake at nighttime. And the writers also clearly wanted us to see that right before the giant dolls started attacking the people who were in the cabins, there was a melody that started playing. And it's important for us to keep all of this information in mind because it leaves us with only a few different possible explanations for what's been going on here. The first is that based on what we saw here is that it more than likely was not the villagers who used to live in these cabins, likely even hundreds of years ago, that tied this rope to the giant doll monsters, which therefore implies that whoever tied those giant dolls is working for the monsters, and that it was specifically done so that the townspeople would be able to bring them back from the lake so that the monsters can start killing the people of the town. Because remember, it was specifically stated that they are not scarecrows, and they were never created for the purpose of being scarecrows. They were normal-sized dolls that Child Tabitha used to play with before they were thrown into the lake. This is important because the second thing is that we specifically heard a melody playing before the arrival of the giant dolls, which tells us that whatever that was that Jim and Kenny repeatedly heard knocking at the cabins was not one of the giant doll monsters. It was probably something completely different in every way. The third thing is that whatever that was that Tabitha saw when she was having that vision of a past version of herself living in the village as a child that was able to walk in the day is also seemingly something completely different to what we see from the giant doll monsters, who can seemingly only attack people at night. And it's important that you keep it in mind. That thing came up to Tabitha in the day, but these giant dolls did not activate until nighttime. So they are probably two completely different beings. It's important that you keep all of this in the back of your mind, because what we're really seeing here is that everything that we saw in this episode, and Tabitha killing one of these giant dolls especially, was always a part of a plan made by the entity in control of the monsters, in a very similar vein to what happened to Boyd when he was used to kill Smiley. Basically, what I'm trying to say right now is that Tabitha has probably been used, just like what happened with Boyd and the cicadas, as a pawn to aid in the creation of a new monster, which is why this next scene that I'm about to show you matters so much.
The dolls, they were mine. I was playing with them. Shh. A man came and took them from me. He said they gave him nightmares, so he threw them in the lake. But one day, the man died. His nightmares came out of the lake. Talisman will protect us from this. How do you know that?
There's way too many people focusing on the wrong thing in this scene, which is whether or not this is the Lake of Tears or something completely different. But ultimately, I don't think this lake even matters at all, because in reality, the only reason that Tabitha was even here in the cabins to be able to kill the giant doll in the first place is because the entity appeared as the ghost of Jim Matthews to deceive Ethan into finding the Lake of Tears, which Ethan is only doing because he believes that he will be able to revive his father when he finds it. Basically, what I'm saying is that this entire thing was always a ploy made by whoever's in control of the monsters to make sure that Tabitha would be in the village with the cabins so that she specifically would kill the giant doll. It's very similar to how Boyd would never have been able to kill Smiley if the entity didn't send him to get infected with the worms in the first place. All of this is by design. There's not a single thing we're seeing here that is happening by chance. The ballerina showed Boyd how to kill Smiley, and I suspect that the entity is also responsible for whatever memory or thought that Tabitha saw in her mind that made her know how to kill the giant doll. But even more importantly, that Roger being killed by the giant doll was not an accident. He was always the intended target. Like, think about this. Right before he died, Roger literally expressed that he was terrified that there was some kind of demon hiding in the bottom of that lake. This cannot be a coincidence when we consider that he specifically was the only person in the entire group group that was killed by the giant doll monster that broke into the cabin, and we've literally known for years at this point, because of Sarah's conversation with Kenny, that death is a requirement for your fears to be absorbed and turned into a monster by the forest. And what this means is that the entity wanted Tabitha to kill the giant doll so that he could transform, modify, and therefore evolve the energy that came out after she killed it into a new monster. And more than likely, it's going to be the golem that Fatima's been making in the 3rd floor of Colony House. But I guess there's also the much less dramatic option that is just going to be a very similar looking golem that was made by the entity himself using mud that he gathered from the bottom of that lake at the cabins. And I know this cannot be a coincidence, because in this very same episode, we are given confirmation that every single requirement for the entity to create a new monster has been fulfilled by the people at the cabins, which is why you need to listen very closely to the next scene that I'm about to show you.
Boyd said it was like this place feeds on our pain. But what if it does more than that? Nathan was always terrified of cicadas. He thought they were monsters. What if that really is Nathan's nightmare out there? What if the people who die here, what if their fears become part of the forest?
Now, this conversation between Sarah and Kenny is very important for us to start to understand just how badly we are being played, because it's obviously directly connected to what we saw happening with Tabitha and the giant doll monster that she killed. First things first, it is specifically said that you have to die before your fears become part of the forest. And B, the entity in control of the monsters used Sarah's brother's fear of the cicadas to create them. And remember, her brother only even died in the first place because the voices, who we now know are the man in yellow, sent her on a mission to kill the boy, seemingly Ethan. And I also want to point out that Sarah's brother did not die in the forest. He died in the town, but yet his fears were still consumed by the forest. In other words, what this really means is that the town is working with the forest. But I am so disappointed that they didn't use Ellis to kill one of those giant dolls, because he was right there. It would have been so good for his character and would have instantly justified all of the screen time that he's been given in the show. It's such a missed opportunity that it's crazy. It would have been so good for Ellis to do it. Either way, we already know that Tabitha killing the giant doll doesn't mean anything really, because the entity would never have allowed it to happen if it wasn't beneficial to the evil side of the town. Just like Boyd being sent into the dungeon so that he could get infected with the worms and killed Smiley, which is what allowed him to evolve into the cicadas, the entire thing that we saw at the cabins was always a setup. The rope buried underneath the cabbages, the very conveniently placed scarecrow effigy Tabitha used to kill the giant doll in the first place, and of course the ghost of Jim Matthews using Ethan to lure Tabitha to the cabins out by the lake in the first place. The entire thing was always a setup from the very beginning. And we know this for a fact because of the scene that I'm about to show you. And I want you to pay very close attention to what is said by Fatima.
I saw what they did. It promised them that they would live forever. They sacrificed their children.
This scene is massive, bigger than you think, especially now with what we saw in this episode. Because what we see happening with the giant doll monsters is one of the biggest clues that there was never a child sacrifice in the first place. Like, I want you to think about this. The giant dolls were created from the nightmares of this random man who was probably the father of this child that Tabitha is supposedly reincarnated from, right? So they have never been human, correct? So if the Nightwalkers, like Smiley, are supposed to be completely different to the giant doll monsters, why would the creators of the show officially name them nightmare creatures? Which is also the same thing that the giant dolls that have never been human also clearly are. Because even in the credits of this specific episode, they are still called the nightmare creatures. I don't think this is a coincidence, because these things may never have been human at any point. Like, think about where this information about the child sacrifices that Fatima received even came from in the first place. It was implanted into her brain by the kimono demon. So why do we believe that it was put there for any other purpose than to manipulate the supposedly civilized people of the town into eating each other and tearing themselves apart? Because some of them would obviously want to make a deal, and the other people would obviously refuse to do it. And I think there's a lot of different scenes in this episode implying that we are being manipulated in much worse ways than we have ever realized. Like, just watch this scene and you'll see what I'm talking about.
This is where the children were sacrificed. How does knowing that get us home? Tabitha and I, we already tried to save them so many times. Tell me how we save them when we've already failed.
Hi, Jade. You should have listened to Boyd, but you were never really the smart one, were you?
What we see here is one of the biggest signs that no one in the town, including Tabitha and Jade, have ever been reincarnations. Because I really want you to think about what was happening to Jade in this episode. Every single thing that Jade saw from the very beginning of this episode up until he wakes up in Boyd's office, all of that, everything that he saw was a fake vision, and therefore fake memories being implanted into his brain, seemingly by a child version of his current self, who obviously has never even been in the town. So why is this 12-year-old version of himself the being that is guiding him? It doesn't even make sense. But to someone who's desperate for answers like Jade, he cannot see what he experienced for what it actually is, which is fake memories being implanted into his brain by the entity himself. Like, Jade is obviously going to view it as him having received hidden knowledge while going on an acid trip. And it's clear to me that this is what the monsters were referring to when they said that Jade has always been naive, because he's willing to believe anything that they tell him or show him. Like, just watch this scene with Jade and Jim Matthews.
I looked at the notes and I could hear the music.
And the music just magically popped into your head. Doesn't that strike you as odd?
Now, when you consider how the monsters said that Jade has never been the smart one, I think this is part of what they're referring to. He's desperate for any answers that he never stops to question. Where are these answers coming from? Whereas Jim Matthews was the complete opposite. He questioned everything coming from the town. And I also want to say that I 100% believe that this boy is evil and he is working with the monsters. I think they were showing Jade what they're going to do to him when he inevitably tries to go into the tunnels to try to save the children from that tomb. Very similar to how they showed Tabitha what they always planned to do to Jim Matthews if she kept going down the false path of saving the children locked in the tower. And make sure to follow me on Instagram, because if anything happens to this YouTube channel, that is where you're going to find me. So make sure you follow me there. And the link will also be in the description. And it's very important to do that because we all know that this is a very dangerous time to be on this platform for so many different reasons that it's crazy. So go follow me there so that you always have access to me. But if we do consider that there are actually reincarnations in this show, I have to point out in yet another video that Jade being the reincarnation of Victor's mom and not Tabitha would be yet another direct connection from Jade to Victor's mom. Both of them play the violin and both of them always believe everything that they are told by this place, even when it doesn't make any sense. But Tabitha and Christopher, they specifically are always skeptical of everything that they're told. So if something crawls out of that lake or Fatima's golem becomes a monster, I predict that Tabitha will say everything lies here, just like Christopher, because I think she's going to realize that the ghost of Jim Matthews lured her to the Lake of Tears.
We're in the diner right now. We're trying to figure out what it means that my mom got out.
What do you think it means?
Honestly, I don't think it means anything. This would make us suffer is to give us hope. Maybe that's why I let her out.
Hey, you okay? How did we get here? We were in the tunnels. How the fuck did we get here?
No, you've been sitting here for hours. Jade, you never left.
I think that entire vision that Jade saw was fake. All of it, every single part of it was fake, including the moment showing his supposed predecessors in reincarnations. There was that one scene in one of the trailers of Boyd slamming a wall with a sledgehammer. Maybe Boyd is going to do that. And if he does not find a door in the basement of Colony House, then he will know for a fact that everything Jade saw in his acid trip was a lie. Even when you think about the things that we saw in this episode, there's so many things that just do not make any sense whatsoever. Like, think about this. If the villagers who built the effigies had the capability to kill the giant dolls, which we're supposed to believe that they did, why would they submerge them in the water and tie a rope to them instead of, just permanently taking them out, like what Tabitha seemingly did? It doesn't even make sense. Even the idea of the children being trapped inside of that tomb that Jade saw, it's not even possible to fit 7 different children inside of such a small space if they are still alive. And if Jade actually goes into those tunnels believing that's where the children are, then he is a fool. Because if you believe that the children are locked in the tomb, that would mean that there are no children locked in the tower, which should immediately bring into question who has been misleading the people of this town into believing that there are children locked in the tower, and what are their motivations for doing so. Because if this place lied to you before, why would it be any different now? Even the idea that this place keeps people trapped after death is in opposition to what we saw with the old man chained up in the dungeon, because we have been led to believe that the worms were keeping him alive alive so that he could be tortured for eternity, which directly means that this place does not have the ability to keep feeding off of him after he dies. That is the entire point of the worms, right? And I really want you to remember that this 12-year-old boy who appears to Jade, just like the boy in white, never said at any point that he was trying to show anybody the way home. Jade just assumed that's what he was trying to do, but the boy himself never said that. And most of all, there was only one Ankui child in the tomb with Jade. Not 7, and definitely not 10, as we saw is the name of this child in the credits of this episode. So what we're seeing here is just one of the very many signs that we are being deceived in more ways than we can possibly imagine. Like even when you look at this scene with Victor and his dad, did you notice how this woman, drawn by Victor, who he claims is his mother, being eaten by the yellow man, was wearing a white dress? But we've already seen Victor's mom's death, and she wasn't wearing anything even close to a white dress. So watch this video right here to see my explanation on what this means, because it's one of the biggest signs that, just like we saw from Jade in this episode, that Tabitha has also been implanted with fake memories to make her believe that she is a reincarnation.